Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? Port of call, Occupy at the harbors at Long Beach, Oakland, San Diego, Seattle, and Portland. In New York, a march to Goldman Sachs, part owners of the largest port cargo operator. The message from protesting at the ports and the continuing message that Occupy is morphing from occupations to events.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the $10,000 pyramid.
Rick, I'll tell you what. 10,000 bucks? $10,000 bet?
Romney tries to escape the awful optics of betting $10,000 and makes it worse.
It's like saying, hey, I'll bet you $1 million, X, Y, or Z.
So now he's betting $1 million. The new pledge from Newt Breakfast at Tiffany's Gingrich to uphold the institution of marriage. This time, and another day, another Rick Perry disaster.
I want to say it was over $500 million that went to the country's celebrity.
Company, not country, company. Arizona's Papers, Please law. It will go to the Supreme Court. Boycott blowback. Lowe's bails out on the TV series All-American Muslim because right-wing nutjobs think it does not have enough terrorism in it. But today's boycotteur can be tomorrow's boycottee.
I've never seen a U.S. corporation engage in kind of religious discrimination that Lowe's has just done.
The reaction from Countdown's Maysoon Zayid. And what'll the Republican debate crowd cheer next?
We should give poor kids the same chance to pursue happiness. Finally,
all that and more now on Countdown.
young people ought to learn how to work.
Good evening from New York. This is Monday, December 12th, 330 days until the 2012 presidential election. Occupy the ports. Occupy protesters today marching in force to block shipping operations at major West Coast container ports and also the port of Houston. And it's from Houston. One of the most disturbing pieces of video yet emerges tonight. The fifth story on the Countdown, a day of action targeting what some occupiers call Wall Street on the waterfront, seaports that help move cargo worth more than $700 million a day, along with Wall Street giant Goldman Sachs, a part owner of the Kari Corporation, the country's largest port operator. Starting in Oakland, where some 600 protesters blocked at least two port entrances this morning. Port operators reporting only sporadic disruptions. Other Occupy marches also planned in Oakland today, including one from the now closed Occupy camp at Frank Ogawa Plaza. At the nation's second biggest container port at Long Beach, some 200 protesters there confronting police. There was at least one arrest and complaints from some union workers and the leaders of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, the ILWU, that the protests would cost the rank and file a day's pay. One protester responded.
Well, we respect the ILWU's right to work. We also think that they're being very narrow-sighted, especially the president. A lot of the rank and file support us. We think this is about labor across the board, about outsourcing the jobs, about dignified jobs the world over.
At least 5 protesters arrested at San Diego after as many as 200 blocked 2 terminal entrances there. Port officials there saying they were forced to shut operations down for about an hour and 15 minutes. An Occupy organizer insisting the protest was a success for having raised awareness about workers not being treated fairly. In Portland, Oregon, with hundreds of protesters shutting down 2 port terminals there, the ILWU saying the union supported the Occupy movement's goal, though not closing down the port, at least one trucker agreeing the protest.
Pretty much means the loss of a day's pay. I may get paid some for sitting here, but if I don't make any deliveries, I don't get paid that much.
Meanwhile, that disturbing video I mentioned, Houston police trying some unusual tactics, to say the least, in their confrontation with Occupy protesters off Interstate 610 at that city's port. After meeting some 70 demonstrators head-on with mounted troops, Houston police were confounded briefly by the protesters having blocked the highway and linked themselves together with lengths of PVC pipe. With protesters occupying I-610, the police moved in with their latest weapon, a large red tent. However disturbing it might have been to have that tent dropped over their heads, the Houston PD insists it was used only to keep sparks from flying as they went and cut the pipe that was linking the protesters together. At least 8 of those protesters were arrested. Back in New York, 100 Occupy protesters staged a people's trial of Goldman Sachs at Zuccotti Park. They found the bank guilty of felony fraud, perjury, and $78 billion in theft of taxpayers' funds. Some 300 marchers then marching to Goldman's headquarters to demand the arrest of Goldman CEO Lloyd Blankfein. Police there arresting at least 17 Occupy protesters, Blankfein not included, for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. An NYPD spokesman saying they were asked to move and they failed to do so. Consequently, arrests had to be made. And in another protest that may strike corporate America even closer to home, Occupy demonstrators in Loveland, Colorado showing support for the port protest by targeting a Walmart distribution center. At least 13 arrested there. Elsewhere, about 100 marchers with Occupy Denver on Sunday, targeting a Verizon store to show solidarity with the workers there, while police made at least 55 arrests for illegal lodging in San Francisco, closing an Occupy camp that has been closed and reopened several times before. And in Boston on Saturday, another 46 arrests as the Occupy camp at Dewey Square was shut down, the police action having been expected since Thursday at midnight when a judge had lifted a restraining order that had forestalled eviction. Also expected the amount of force.
They came here with overwhelming force. There were probably about 5 cops to every 1 protester.
Let's go back to Occupy the Ports. I'm joined by Kari, an organizer with Occupy Portland. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.
The Portland Business Journal reported that today's protest closed 2 of the busier terminals, kept several hundred workers from showing up, and forced about 100 trucks to turn it away. Did you guys assess this as a success, and if so, why?
Yeah, we see today as a huge success. We ended up shutting down at least 2 port terminals at the Port of Portland, and actually there's marchers gathering and marching towards a 3rd port terminal right now as we speak in anticipation of shutting that down with a community picket. We feel that our message got across very strongly today, that this is not just about labor struggle, but this is about Wall Street on the waterfront, and this is about the bigger issues of economic inequality. Yeah, we see today as a huge success.
The union issue, the ILWU, the Longshore and Warehouse Union leaders, or at least some of them, objected to the protest. Do you worry, given the sort of genuinely sympathetic interrelationship between the unions and Occupy throughout this process since September, that this might lead to some kind of rift between the movements?
No, I think that what we saw here in Portland was, yes, the ILWU leadership was not able to come out in support of this action. We knew that going into it. We knew that they had legal restrictions on them. But we also have been reaching out really intentionally to the rank and file members here in town for all of the port workers and having conversations with them daily, bringing them into the organizing of this event, asking them to participate in that way. And we've gotten extremely good responses from them. Folks have been extremely sympathetic and excited about the cause from the rank and file. We had the vast majority of workers today on our picket lines respect the community pickets, and I think that this was a movement forward in building our relationship with the rank and file union members in Portland. The
other interrelationship that was of note throughout the Occupy the ports throughout the West Coast and Houston, the idea that this directly or indirectly also targeted a business that directly benefited Goldman Sachs. Was that part of an overall plan, or did you get kind of lucky with that one?
Well, I think that Goldman Sachs makes it easy. They tend to have a lot of bad business practices that we can choose from, and it happened to be the case that they are the majority shareholder of Stevedore Services of America, which operates out of the Port of Portland in 2 terminals, but also operates out of the Port of Los Angeles. And they're currently in a labor struggle with the 17,000 port truckers down in Los Angeles, and so those truck drivers are facing health and safety violations on the job. They're being challenged at their right to organize, and so we are standing in solidarity with those truck workers, and we see it as a really clear example of the ways that working people are suffering trying to make a living wage while Goldman Sachs sits on the other end and profits.
The police reported 3 arrests in Portland and 2 people on weapons charges, and this can always be taken with a grain of salt, but they said they had a loaded automatic pistol, a sword, gas masks, and 2-way radios. I don't know what's particularly odious about a gas mask given what's been done by police throughout the country against Occupy, or 2-way radios for that matter. But the police spokesman said these 3 people appeared to be part of the advance team for the protest. Do you know whether or not that's true? And if so, why would somebody be bringing a sword?
So I can't speak to their motivations or even who necessarily those folks were, but I can say that none of those things were illegal in this particular instance, and they were arrested for, I believe, not having their driver's license on them. This is my understanding of why they were actually arrested. And we have made it clear at Occupy Portland again and again and again, and have made it clear today as well, that we are a nonviolent movement, and we are committed to nonviolence, and we express that today, and we'll continue to express it into the future. So I can't really speak to why they might have had a sword, but they definitely didn't use it today at the ports.
Yeah, Lord only knows. Kari, organizer with Occupy Oakland and a participant in the Occupy the Ports protests. Great thanks for some of your time tonight.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted to show you something that just came to our attention from Occupy Oakland. That's right, the gentleman in the bandana is Scott Olson, the wounded Marine veteran from Iraq, wounded when he was hit by a police gas canister many weeks ago, suffering some brain injuries and having recovered to a great degree, sufficiently to have appeared on this program in an interview week before last. Scott Olson at the Occupy Oakland event, I believe at the port, in a still photograph taken late this afternoon and just made available to us here at Countdown. Today's protests, the latest example of Occupy moving away from actual physical occupations and maintenance of those occupations in public space and towards sort of episodic, large-scale public protests. And for more on that as an overview, I'm joined by Logan Price, a member of the Occupy Wall Street Direct Action Committee, and who participated himself in the Occupy Goldman Sachs event today. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks, Keith.
Let me ask first about, before the big picture, the today picture, the protest at Goldman Sachs. As always with anything in New York, any difficulties with the NYPD apart from the actual arrest?
Well, there always seems to be some difficulties. Definitely one of the things that we saw again today was the NYPD sort of harassing and then sometimes detaining journalists, even if they carry the sort of what we're told are legitimate, these yellow press badges given to them by the city. But so we definitely saw some of that today, and we also saw them targeting people who were live streaming from our own media teams, or just taking video or camera with their cell phones. And that's definitely becoming a pattern too.
It's an odd thing. You would think if they're behaving the way they're supposed to be, why would they care whether or not something was being live streamed? It would seem to be to their benefit, but we can discuss that rhetorically in some other concept and other time.
Right.
Let me ask you about Occupy the Ports and this march to Goldman Sachs and a lot of the events of the last several weeks in particular. Is it your assessment that Occupy is indeed morphing from mostly stationary to mostly mobile?
Well, we've never been totally stationary here in New York. The occupation of Zuccotti Park, Liberty Square, was definitely very important to us, and definitely what sort of kicked off this movement. But it's important to remember that we've been doing large mobilizations in the street since the beginning. What happened today, hopefully, will be also a new pattern of going after some of these big banks that we know are responsible for the financial crisis, and really not letting them off the hook, and doing that nonviolently and creatively. And not just Goldman Sachs, hopefully, but many other banks like Bank of America, et cetera. And even trying to pair that with other tactics like people moving their money and closing bank accounts and stuff like that.
The name of the committee to which you belong, the Occupy Wall Street Direct Action Committee, people hear direct action in a context of American protest, particularly from the 60s, and they assume that means more confrontations with police. Is that indeed, whether they're violent, nonviolent, symbolic, non-symbolic, is that a valid assumption to make? And if it is, or even if it's not, is there a fear that if there's more interaction with the police, rather than passive occupations to some sort of regular showdowns, if you will, with the police, that you might lose public support?
Well, I think it is important, like you mentioned, that this is, nonviolent direct action or civil disobedience, as we also often call it, is, one of the most important of American traditions. And a lot of things that we take for granted now are because the social movements have taken on nonviolent direct action as a way to have their voices heard when they realize that voting or whatever other methods are sort of handed to them by the government are not really sufficient. And I think that's why part of the reason why the Occupy movement has struck such a chord recently in the last few months is because people are really realizing that, we can't really vote with our votes don't count as much because the corporations and the banks are voting with their dollars, right? So I think it's important that we continue to use direct action and that we use it as nonviolently as possible. And we're in a situation right here in New York where the winter's coming and it's getting very cold, and so we're having to decide, okay, what are the things we're going to do through the winter that are really going to set us up to be able to come back and force in the spring? the Occupy movement is definitely not over, as the West Coast showed us today. It's also not over here in New York either.
And to that point, this may sound like the dumbest question you've ever asked. It may be one of the dumbest ones the dumbest one you've ever answered or been addressed, and it certainly is one of the dumbest ones I've ever asked. Is there some plan to take a holiday break, or where does Occupy go in the remaining weeks of the year?
Well, I think a lot of us would definitely love to go home for the holidays. We don't all have that option. A lot of folks gave up everything they had to come here and to be part of this movement, and they'll be organizing through the winter. We have immediate needs to make sure that people have places to stay and stuff like that are warm and safe. But I think some people will take the holidays off, but the movement itself is definitely not taking the holidays off. It may appear that way that things are slowing down, but a lot of that is because we are at a very important impasse right now, where we're having to sort of readjust and figure out what are the best strategies and tactics to move us forward in the next year.
Logan Price of Occupy Wall Street's Direct Action Committee. Great, thanks for your time tonight.
Thank you, Keith.
The Republican three-ring circus continues tonight. Gingrich pledges not to speak ill of another candidate, so he says something mean about Romney, but insists the reporter has to attribute it to a senior official with the Gingrich campaign. And for his part, Mr. Romney gets schooled by a gay veteran. That's next. This is Countdown. The $10,000 pyramid scheme, how Mitt Romney disconnected even from Republicans, and out today, he's made it worse. While Newt breakfast at Tiffany's, Gingrich signs a pledge to uphold the institution of marriage. Notice, please, it doesn't say his marriage. A justice recuses herself as the Arizona Papers, Please law hits the Supreme Court, giving the conservatives a 5-3 advantage to make racial profiling legal in Arizona after all. And how have the mighty fallen? Lonesome Rhodes Beck attacked, cut to ribbons by Breitbart. Worst person's ahead on Countdown. With the I'm going to win the lottery next week mentality of many lower-income Republican supporters, it's often hard to guess what could actually be ostentatious enough to piss them off. But in our fourth story on the Countdown, Mitt Romney just found out you can boast about the money you have, but they don't, not now anyway. But don't boast about throwing away your money.
I read your first book, and it said in there that your mandate in Massachusetts, which should be the model for the country. And I know it came out of the reprint of the book, but, you know, I'm just saying, you were for individual mandates, my friend.
You know what? You've raised that before, Rick, and you're simply wrong.
It was true then.
No.
It's true now.
Rick, I'll tell you what. $10,000 bucks? $10,000 bet?
I'm not in the betting business.
Factcheck.org says Perry was, in fact, mischaracterizing what was revised in Romney's book, but it was Romney's bet itself which quickly drew the backlash from all sides. The Democratic National Committee created the Twitter hashtag #WhatTenK which soon started trending worldwide. The DNC followed up with a web ad called Mitt Romney, simply out of touch 10,000 times over. Rick Perry's campaign attacked in a web ad as well entitled The Truth Cannot Be Bought. John Huntsman, who was not invited to Saturday's debate due to low polling numbers, set up the website 10kbet.com, highlighting negative coverage of both Romney's health care plan and the debate bet. And as for Mr. Romney's defense,
this was an outrageous number to answer an outrageous charge from him, and it's been proven wrong time and time again. He keeps raising it, and I said, okay, let's put something outrageous out there. It's like saying, hey, I'll bet you $1 million X, Y, or Z.
Good work. Now you just made it $1 million bet. Here's hoping Romney didn't have a bet down on who would win a confrontation today in New Hampshire, him or a gay service veteran.
And do you support?
I support repealing. I support the repeal of the New Hampshire law. I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. That's my view.
Governor, we got to get on with Fox News right now.
Oh, I guess the question was too hot.
No, I gave you the answer.
Y'all have a good day.
You said you had a yes or no answer. I gave you the answer.
You did, and I appreciate your answer. And you know, I also learned something, and New Hampshire is right. You have to look a man in the eye to get a good answer. And you know what, Governor? Good luck.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day to you, sir.
You're going to need it.
Also, we learned today of an attack on Romney from Gingrich, he who had pledged publicly not to criticize his fellow GOP candidates. A New Hampshire newspaper recently included a quote from an unnamed senior aide in the Gingrich campaign in response to criticism from the Romney camp. Gingrich's spokesman now tells the New York Times the aide was actually Gingrich. And since everybody's attacking Romney, Romney is attacking Gingrich. Today, Romney said Gingrich should return more than $1.6 million that he was paid by government-backed mortgage giant Freddie Mac. In response, here's Gingrich.
I would just say that if Governor Romney would like to give back all the money he's earned from bankrupting companies and laying off employees over his years at Bain, that I would be glad to then listen to him. And I'll bet you $10, not $10,000, that he won't take the offer.
Ooh, somebody got spanked. And so the betting game continues, but which of the two candidates is winning among the voters? It is Gingrich, according to Romney.
Governor, is Newt Gingrich the front runner in this race?
He is right now.
In other Gingrich news, the candidate has now become the latest in the GOP field to endorse the controversial marriage pledge from an influential evangelical group in Iowa that opposes same-sex marriage and abortion. Gingrich did not actually sign the document, but he did send a letter affirming his strong support for the group's mission. In it, he writes, "I also pledge to uphold the institution of marriage through personal fidelity to my spouse and respect for the marital bonds of others." Well, to do that one time out of the last three would be pretty good. Presumably, he is still good on number 3. Finally, Rick Perry. He doesn't know the voting age in the U.S. or how many justices there are in the Supreme Court or their names, and now we've discovered another thing he does not know. In a campaign stop in Iowa yesterday, Perry criticized President Obama's handling of government spending.
No greater example of it than this administration sending millions of dollars into the solar industry, and we lost that money. I want to say it was over $500 million that went to the country Solyndra.
Joining us now from the capital of the country, Solyndra, Sun City, let's bring in Sam Stein, political editor and reporter of the Huffington Post. Good evening, Sam.
It's beautiful here in Solyndra. Thank you.
Goodness. The point I made at the start, I thought GOP voters were predisposed, no matter their own financial conditions, to like rich candidates. Why was this Romney bet ad lib? Why did that hit such a sour note?
I don't know. I mean, it's funny because obviously the context here is his background in Bain, but you also have Newt Gingrich, who took out a $500,000 line at Tiffany's, who boasted about getting $60,000 a pop for speeches. So it's not like Newt's not throwing around outrageous figures himself, but for Romney it fit this preconceived notion of him as this man born with a silver spoon, handed everything, who could casually offer up a $10,000 bet without even blinking an eye. And I know he said, oh, it was just like if I had offered a $1 million bet in that sound clip he played. Well, he didn't offer a $1 million bet. That was the problem, was that had he offered a $1 million bet, it would have been more unbelievable. But it was almost like he believed that this was an honest wager that got everyone riled up.
Small piece of change.
Yeah.
Mr. Gingrich and the signing, or at least the affirming of this marital pledge, you have to give him credit certainly for chutzpah on the thing. Is he succeeding in putting these really sort of tawdry instances from his past off limits in some way? I mean, this idea that he had been pre-disastered coming into the position of being the latest front runner, are we now seeing it in action, or is at some point his marital history going to become a major issue in this campaign?
It's a great question, because there's going to be a point where either his story of personal redemption, which he's told through the lens of him converting to Catholicism and becoming a more honest individual in his own personal life, is going to meet the friction of people attacking him, whether directly or through mailers or through surrogates, on his own very sordid personal history. And I'm curious to see which one wins. Obviously, people are, prone to believe a story of redemption. They want to know, or they want to believe in someone who admits that he grew up, and I think he will be given the benefit of the doubt, and certainly pledging or making pledges like he did today doesn't hurt. But, we never know how much those attack mailers can move the dial here, and I'm gathering in the next couple of weeks, if not even sooner, we're going to start, Iowans are going to start being flooded with that stuff.
About Governor Perry and the nation of Solyndra, and wherever, Laura, I'm just playing a national anthem in my head of various options.
Yes.
Are we talking about it being time for an intervention with Governor Perry, or where does this campaign stand? Are you in touch with anybody in this campaign, or does anybody admit to being in this campaign at this point?
There are people in the campaign. I'm in touch with some of them, and it is embarrassing. I mean, I think they privately think it's embarrassing. If you're running for president, you should probably know, at the very minimum, the voting age, maybe the date of the election, maybe how many Supreme Court justices there are. We can go through the whole thing. obviously, in some respects, ignorance isn't a big problem with the people he's trying to appeal to. But it does reinforce two things. One is that he's a dumber version of George W. Bush. And the second, more important thing, is that he would have a really tough time handling a general election, especially general election debates, against Barack Obama. And I think that's where this gets really debilitating, is the more often he has a brain fart and he freezes up, the more often Republican primary voters are going to be like, God, we really cannot trot him out there against Barack Obama.
Part of that was very gracefully put. I have to compliment you on the way you phrased.
Thank you.
But last question.
Was it the brain fart part? I hope
no,
so.
earlier than that. The debate ratings, not that this decides the being and purpose of an entire primary system, but the 16th of these debates in the middle of December was the most highly rated yet. Is there any way to get rid of these people? Are we just going to see these? Is the number going to increase between? Are they going to have the debates after the nomination has been settled? Because this is one of the most successful television series of this season.
Oh yeah, and you know it's a huge drama. People love it. And this was without Herman Cain, and I thought Herman Cain was the big draw. But this, you know, the thing is, if you look at, this is actual, if you look at the primary schedule and the way that delegates are apportioned in this primary schedule, you know, Mitt Romney hinted at this. This thing could drag on for a while. And as this thing gets dwindled down to 2 candidates, there's just going to be more debates, and it's just going to get even more to be must-watch TV. So, you know, keep scheduling them. I'll keep writing about them.
Simon Cowell is the moderator for one of the latest.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
See, I had to open my mouth. Sam Stein of the Huffington Post. Great thanks. And give my regards to the guy who was favored by 49 points and won by 1 point. He knows who he is, and so do you.
All right. I'll do that.
That's all I'm saying. Thanks, Sam.
Take care.
Lowe's thought it was avoiding controversy when it succumbed to right-wing pressure and joined a boycott against a series depicting American Muslims as, you know, Americans. Now Lowe's is being boycotted, and there are late-breaking developments on this story as a popular entertainer and activist has stepped in to buy up all the commercial time that Lowe's and the other terrified corporations have dropped. Coming up. The Supreme Court takes on the Arizona Papers, Please law next. First, the sanity break. Well, that's the wrong term for it today, but it's an anniversary anyway. And 11 years ago, the Supreme Court issued a hurried little ruling in a modest case with no long-term judicial implications. It was called Bush v. Gore, and it ended the second longest undecided presidential election in American history, and it led to the deaths of 4,400 American service personnel in Iraq, plus at least 100,000 Iraqis. And you can add in many other groups of dead, depending on how far you want to stretch your definition. Sleep well, Supreme Court. Time marches on. We begin, as we always do, with a bird that can whistle the Super Mario Brothers theme song. There's not really much more to say. It's a bird that can whistle the Super Mario Brothers theme song. This is on your television right now. To the internets, or a little hallway volleyball. Mom always said not to play ball in the house. This is why. Bump set. Ouch. Misty May, that's got to hurt. 1 point ceiling, 0 points girls who thought it was a good idea to play volleyball in the hallway. It's a header. Finally, not quite Christmas season until the occasion of the Tulsa, Oklahoma annual Wiener Dogs on Ice foot race, or paw race. As always, it's BYO Wiener Dog, or Dachshund if you want to be technical. The dogs are lined off, and they're off. They're running. Well, some of them are running. Some of them are just sort of wandering, but a few actually made it to the finish line at the other side of the ice rink. Unfortunately, the winner was later disqualified when it was discovered that it was half slinky. Time marches on. Worst persons, and Fox gets caught faking another graphic to try to make unemployment look worse than it is. Ahead on Countdown. Dumont's The Rumpus Room with Johnny Olson will not be seen tonight, so we can instead bring you Countdown, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. We're live each night at 8 Eastern. We call it Happy Hour. The Supreme Court jumping today into the question of Arizona's so-called Papers, Please law. This after a federal court blocked some of the most extreme stipulations of that law, including the requirements that immigrants in Arizona carry ID papers and the ability of police to check the status of anyone they even suspect of being here illegally. Our third story, the Arizona case is the third politically charged dispute the court will hear in the coming election year. The others, the president's health care law and a Texas redistricting case. Arizona Governor Jan Brewer, who signed this law in April 2010, defending it again with the same memorized statement with which she's defended it for 18 months, as well as defending the various copycat laws it spawned in other states.
It's stunning that the Obama administration would file suit against an individual state seeking to safeguard its own citizens. It's outrageous that the federal government would file suit against 3 more states, South Carolina, Alabama, and now Utah, that followed Arizona's lead.
Jan Brewer proving there are headless torsos in Arizona. The administration arguing that regulating immigration is the job of the federal government, not the states. White House spokesman Kari telling reporters today simply, quote, we look forward to arguing our point of view. The president's most recent Supreme Court appointee, Justice Elena Kagan, announcing she'll recuse herself from the decision, presumably because she was Solicitor General when the government filed the original lawsuit. As for the GOP candidates, Newt Gingrich recently endorsing that South Carolina law that allows police to demand a person's immigration status. Michelle Bachmann, along with other congressional Republicans, filing a brief backing the law. Joining us now, Elizabeth Wydra, Chief Counsel at the Constitutional Accountability Center. Thanks for your time tonight.
Thanks for having me, Keith.
Looking at this externally, a layman would probably think that the issue that the court's going to look at is probable cause or invasion of privacy or racial profiling. Is that how the court will look at this, or to them is this a who gets to enforce a law thing, state versus federal?
Well, it's definitely a federalism issue, and while underneath there are questions of civil rights, civil liberties, criminal due process issues, it's about the balance of power between federal and state governments. And you know, Jan Brewer can say it as many times as she likes, but it doesn't make it true. While politicians like Brewer and Sheriff Joe Arpaio and former State Senator Russell Pierce have tried to pitch this as a battle between them and the Obama administration, you know, the truth is that they're really picking a fight with our nation's founders, such as James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, who made clear that the federal government and not the states has the power to regulate immigration and naturalization. Is there any indication, have there been any cases that this court has reviewed, and do they give any indication of where they might go? Because obviously if this is now a 5-3 without Kagan, conservative versus liberal appointees, it would seem like there'd be something of a stretch here to get this to go in against the Arizona law. Well, you know, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, well, obviously, I think those of us who believe that the injunction against the most egregious provisions of SB 1070 is correct, while we would probably prefer to have Justice Kagan on the bench, we are nonetheless happy that she, of course, is taking seriously her ethical obligations to recuse in cases where appropriate, you know, despite some grumbling by conservatives in the healthcare litigation. But I don't think it will necessarily break down on political lines. You know, this isn't Bush v. Gore, which you mentioned earlier. As I said just a moment ago, you know, this is really not a new idea. The Obama administration didn't come up with the idea that states don't have the power to direct immigration policy. You know, you can read Alexander Hamilton in Federalist Paper number 32. He makes that crystal clear. And whether or not you're a conservative or a liberal, the Constitution is the Constitution, and we all have to follow it, even Arizona. All right, so let's say one of the 5 conservative justices votes along with Alexander Hamilton, and it's a 4-4 tie. What happens? In the case of a 4-4 tie, then the Ninth Circuit ruling affirming the preliminary injunction that blocks certain provisions of SB 1070 from going into effect, that will stand. So that ruling will remain good law. So in order to reverse that ruling and strike it down, thus letting SB 1070 go into effect, Arizona would have to get 5 votes. So if it's a 4-4 split, then the preliminary injunction against SB 1070 stays in place. Elizabeth Wydra, Chief Counsel at the Constitutional Accountability Center. Thanks for some of your insight and for the mechanics of the process as well. It's my pleasure.
Something else tonight from the racism file. The right goes berserk because a TV series about American Muslims does not depict all of them as terrorists and Sharia law zealots. The right then demands an advertiser's boycott. Lowe's falls for it. Now Lowe's is being boycotted for boycotting, and somebody has stepped up to buy all the ad time. Coming up. A show about American Muslims that the scum who hate based solely on religion claim is biased because it doesn't show enough terrorists. Lowe's Hardware joins a right-wing boycott. Now it's getting boycotted. How far has he sunk? Pretty damn far when he's being slammed by a prominent conservative screamer. Worsts next. The Lowe's Hardware chain leads a bunch of weaselly corporate slimeballs caving into a right-wing Islamophobic boycott pushed by people who think a TV show about American Muslims doesn't show enough terrorists. That's next. First, because remembering that the definition of terrorism is not violence but the exploitation of fear, here are some real terrorists. Countdown's top 3 nominees for today's worst persons in the world. The bronze to Greg Jarrett, America's newsroom host on the political whorehouse that is Fox News. Remembering 10 days ago when unemployment dropped from 9% in October to 8.6% in November, and the morning show Fox and Morons solved that problem by showing this? The dip in unemployment did not fit their worldview, so they rounded it back up to 9%. Now, Fox has done it again. This morning, supposedly straight newsreader Jarrett showed the following graphic about the month-by-month unemployment rate. This will be tough to see if I just say, notice anything wrong here? But look at the 3 numbers on the left. 9.0 in January, 8.9 in February, 8.8 in March. Now look at the number on the far right, 8.6 in November. The numbers on the left, 9, 8.9, 8.8, they're lower than the 8.6 on the right. The baseline should be plummeting between October and November on the far right there, but that doesn't fit Fox's worldview either, so they just didn't show it. This is called journalistic dishonesty or propaganda. Once again, comparisons between Fox News and the Ministry of Truth in Orwell's 1984 are insulting. They're insulting to Fox News because they're so much better at it than Oceania was. The runner-up, Lonesome Rhodes Beck. You will recall that after Fox fired him, he opened this internet version of his show, which still boasts only 230,000 subscribers, meaning he lost about 9/10 of his audience, among the departed Andrew Breitbart, who has just caused a great moral dilemma among us rational types by vivisecting Beck on the air. Beck is a coward and won't defend himself when he makes a mistake. Go on. He lied to his audience on television. He jumped the gun and, in essence, jumped the shark. He's creating a hysteria that there's going to be food shortages because of a crisis that's coming. He's profiting off this. This guy is a huckster. Before you say, Andrew Breitbart, you have unsuspected depth, just remember that it was Breitbart's hissy fit was prompted by Beck suggesting that Newt Gingrich is actually a secret progressive, and that if the Tea Party supported Gingrich instead of President Obama, it could only be because Gingrich is white and Obama isn't. Still, Beck just got schooled by Andrew Breitbart. Time to offer refunds on those subscriptions, Glendale. But our winners, the crowd at the latest GOP debate in Des Moines, Iowa on Saturday. I know. If you're like me, you thought that with Gingrich lying and Perry counting wrong and Bachmann hating, it was just a rerun. Well, there's a new one. Bad news for those of you hoping to make it to the spring without going insane. It was the highest rated of the 16 debates thus far, meaning the networks will keep showing them to you. Anyway, one theme continues, the debate crowds cheering every weakness this nation has strived to correct about itself, cheering everything short of human sacrifice. They've cheered executions, cheered letting an uninsured man die inside a hospital, and booed a U.S. soldier because he was gay. Saturday, Gingrich's proposal that the 120-year-old child labor laws should be repealed so union school janitors could be fired and be replaced by 13-year-old poor students.
An entry-level janitor gets paid twice as much as an entry-level teacher. You take half those janitors, you could give lots of poor kids a work experience in the cafeteria, in the school library, in the front office, in a lot of different things. I'll stand by the idea young people ought to learn how to work. Middle-class kids do it routinely. We should give poor kids the same chance to pursue happiness. Finally,
pursue happiness by cleaning the toilets their richer classmates get to use. And a mighty roar goes up from the GOP crowd. Yay! We love the elitist candidates who want to enslave our middle and lower class asses. Yay! The crowd at the 11 billionth Republican debate at Drake University in Des Moines, today's worst persons in the world. In 2009, a successful effort I'll quiet down until you're done over there. 2009, a successful effort began to have companies stop advertising on Glenn Beck's show because the hatred and bigotry contained therein. Now a right-wing group has asked companies not to advertise on a show because it doesn't contain enough of that. In our number one story, hardware giant Lowe's and several other companies have removed their ads from the TLC program, All American Muslim. Not because it portrays all Muslims as violent terrorists, but because it doesn't. The show follows 5 families who live in Dearborn, Michigan. The purpose is to offer an intimate look at the customs and celebrations, misconceptions, and conflicts these families face outside and within their own community. But the right-wing Florida Family Association saw this for what it actually was, if you're paranoid with delusions of being persecuted, an attempt to make Americans sympathize with terrorists. In an email members sent to advertisers, pre-written for them, they described the show as propaganda, clearly designed to counter legitimate and present-day concerns about many Muslims who are advancing Islamic fundamentalism and Sharia law. And adding, the show profiles only Muslims that appear to be ordinary folks. You know, like those other shows that show those conservatives who aren't homophobes or racists or sadists or totalitarians. The letter was enough for several companies to fold up and pull their advertising. One of the companies, the hardware giant Lowe's, which said in a Facebook post, Lowe's has received a significant amount of communication on this program from every perspective possible. Individuals and groups have strong political and societal views on this topic. This program became a lightning rod for many of those views. As a result, we did pull our advertising on this program. We strongly support and respect the right of our customers, the community at large, and our employees to have different views. If we have made anyone question that commitment, we apologize. In response to the likes of Lowe's dropping their ads, media mogul Russell Simmons stepped up and has bought the remaining ad time. He tweeted earlier today, just purchased remaining spots for All American Muslim for next week. The show is now sold out. Keep your money, Lowe's, and we will keep ours. I never asked Maysoon Zayid to comment on Muslim stuff because she's a contributor for the show, not a Muslim contributor. But I know this really bothers you, so welcome.
Thank you.
Lowe's comes out with the standard, we're sorry if we offended anyone, apology. Do you think they understand why people might be offended by this?
I know that Lowe's has no idea why we're offended because I actually took the time to call Lowe's.
Oh, my.
And it was even more disturbing than, like, calling the cable company. It was really frustrating because when I called and complained, the first person who answered the phone was, like, some poor Midwestern girl named Tammy who was just trying to make her Christmas money.
Seriously?
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I felt so bad for her because she didn't even really know what a Muslim was. And she was like, I don't know if we sell it. And I'm like, no, it's not. You're selling it. It's, you know. And then they read me the statement.
Oh.
And the statement is, like, incredibly vile. It's the type of thing that, like, only Newt Gingrich would say.
Yeah.
Like, it makes no sense in America what they're saying. They said they pulled the ads because it's a lightning rod issue.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pressed them and said, well, what's so offensive? Like, what makes this show, say, more offensive than the pedophile's dream, Toddlers in Tiara, or the polygamist's dream, Sister Wives? Why this show?
Yeah.
And they said, well, they told us it was offensive. So they won't explain why.
And they won't say who the they is. It's just somebody in management decided to pull on this?
I mean, I know who the they is.
Yeah.
The they is the people who are living in mom's basement
Right.
with enough time to sit and write Lowe's. Like, in all my life, I've never been like, oh, my God, I have to get Lowe's to stop.
Well,
Like, who are these people?
Pamela Geller. This is a deeply disturbed individual, and the people at the World Net Daily website, which for a long time I thought was a spoof site. I thought it was a really good parody site, and then it turns out they're serious about this crap because they're nuts. They're nuts, and they subscribe to the idea that somebody has to be hated, and you're it.
Yeah.
Right? That's what it boils down to?
Yeah. It boils down to the fact that and I have to say that, like, in everything that we talk about, we kid a lot, but I find Pam Geller to be really, really, truly terrifying. I think the stuff that she does is dangerous.
Yep.
I made the mistake of responding to a tweet. She tweeted me saying that the title of a documentary that I'm in with my partner Dino Bidala is insulting and hateful. She's telling me, what's hateful?
Right.
And you are the most hateful human being I've ever met. And ever since I tweeted her, I have crazy people stalking
Do you
me.
think that she left off the word hateful enough? Because that's what this is. This is what this is about. This is a show that's meant to show that American Muslims can be part of a stupid reality show just like anybody else, and they can live boring and meaningless lives in Dearborn, Michigan, like anybody can live anywhere. They're almost Kardashians. They're that uninteresting television-wise, and yet people are. It's insufficient. People have actually bought into these crazy notions.
And I've had a lot of people actually point out to me the fact that, well, it's not balanced. It's not balanced because it doesn't show hate. And I'm like, did Jeff Foxworthy show lynchings on his show?
Excellent.
Did the Cosbys have like that great gang episode? When I come here, do I flip over the table because I'm from New Jersey? We don't always have to show the worst of us.
Well, now if you're going to bring up New Jersey, we're going to have a different argument altogether. But lastly, Russell Simmons steps up and buys the ads. What about that?
I always say, who needs Lowe's when you have Uncle Rush?
That's it.
And I also want to say just one last thing before I go. Even though Newt Gingrich said I don't exist, I do. And you're not talking to no one. I'm here.
Excellent. Countdown contributor Maysoon Zayid, as ever. Great. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
All right, that's Countdown for this 338th day since John Boehner and the Republicans took the House. That's 338 days in which the Republicans have not passed a jobs bill of any kind. I'm Keith Olbermann. Congratulations on getting through another day of this crap. Don't forget, don't shop at Lowe's. Good night and good luck.